Welcome back, Bilal. We're excited to have you back. Thank you for breaking that paternity leave to come back and share with us a lot of the knowledge that you have in your head. And today's topic is all about payments in the workers' compensation system. We want to break down as many possible ways how payments come in to injured workers. So I'm hoping to pick your brain. So for that matter, let's talk about one of the most important payments within the workers' comp system. We talk about it all the time, and that's wage replacement. Can you tell me how does that payment come into effect for someone who's going through a case right now?
Yeah, when we're talking about wage replacement, we're really talking about what's called temporary disability benefits, which is a form of benefit in workers' comp that's designed to compensate you for your time off work, basically, while you're recovering, while the doctors still feel like there's things that can be done to help rehabilitate you. Oftentimes you're given work restrictions or you're told by the doctor to stay off of work while you're healing, in which case you could be entitled to temporary partial disability or temporary total disability. And that benefits really to compensate you for the paycheck you're not really earning while you're injured.
Got it. So this is how do they calculate this? This is a payment that, is it a flat rate payment? How does this work?
So there's several different ways you can calculate temporary disability. Ultimately, it's all about what is a fair representation of what your earnings are. And typically in the labor code, there's a few different versions of how to calculate this depending on your situation. But it's really, on average, 2/3 of what we call your average weekly wage, meaning leading up to your date of injury. Typically, we look at the first year or last year leading up to it. What did you earn on average per week?
Mm-hmm.
And the benefit is 67% of that. It's 2/3 of it. And the whole idea behind the benefit being 2/3 is it's supposed to represent your after-tax wages. So we use your gross average weekly wage, not your net, meaning not after your state or federal income tax, state disability, all that jazz, so that the amount you're receiving is 2/3 off the gross. So it should be fairly representative of what you're taking home after taxes, a paycheck. Of course, subject to what we have is minimums and maximums, meaning, if you make $5 million a year, sorry, you're not getting
I was going to say,
dollars a year in temporary disability.
That is great that you put that out there. And we're going to dive into those maximums and minimums in a little bit. So this is essentially how you replace your wages while you're recovering, right? This is considered the temporary total disability or temporary partial disability. And we can dive into that subject another time because that's a whole loophole.
Yep.
Tell me about permanent disabilities, because that's another form of payment that injured workers see a lot, and they confuse it with the temporary disability. What's the difference between permanent and temporary?
Temporary disability is really about compensating you for your lost paycheck. That's really what it's about. Permanent disability is about compensating you for the functional limitations that you have following an injury that can't be corrected. If you have, certain injuries, you may not fully recover. A lot of people, we hope, do make a recovery, but the reality is most don't. And when you don't, you oftentimes have functional limitations, or we have what we call diagnosis-based estimates, meaning that if you have certain condition, regardless of the outcome, you have a percentage of disability that's associated with it. And so those permanent disability percentages have monetary value attached to them. So the whole idea is that if you have deficits that couldn't be fixed, you get paid money for those deficits.
Got it. So, for example, I'll share my dad's story. My dad got injured at work and injured his hand severely to the point where he can no longer stretch his hand out. So technically you can say he has no grip, can't really do a lot of things with his hand. This permanent disability that gets paid for him would be just for that part of that injury that would otherwise affect him to get a job in the future, or even in his current job, to be able to make more money because of that injured hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the sad part is the permanent disability is not necessarily reflective of what your limitations are going to be insofar as your ability to continue on with your work. There's a lot of people who have permanent disability ratings that are rather small, but because of the limitation, any limitation they have from their injury, they can't go back to their same work.
Got it.
So a lot of people are disappointed just in terms of the value of the disability and what it means for them professionally. Oftentimes it doesn't doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense that they get like a low value rating, but now they're displaced from their career.
Yeah, totally. I can see that happening. Speaking about being displaced from your career, what happens when you're getting, temporary disabilities versus permanent? Like, what are the, I guess, deadlines to this? Like, are there any deadlines set into these payments?
Yeah, the temporary disability, you can get up to 104 weeks, not all in a row. You can have broken periods of temporary disability, or you could just be off for 2 years straight,
Mhm.
on average. Uh, that can be paid to you within 5 years from your date of injury. So if you're still temporarily disabled and it's year number 6, too bad, so sad. You don't get any more benefits, regardless of whether or not you've, been paid 104 weeks. So, if your temporary disability starts 4.5 years in following your injury, you're only going to get 6 months of temporary disability. It doesn't matter that you're not going to get 104 weeks.
Yikes. So
There are
there are.
exceptions for the total amount of temporary disability you can receive. 5 years doesn't change, but if you have a particular type of injury like HIV, high velocity eye injuries, hepatitis, amputations, then legally you're entitled to up to 240 weeks of temporary disability benefits instead of 104.
Interesting. I did not know that. That is good to note. Now, tell me a little bit in regards to something we were talking about earlier, which were the maximums and the minimums you get for this. So you said if someone were to make $5 million, there's a cutoff. Like, let's talk about this 2025 maximums, because I'm assuming this changes throughout the years.
Yeah, so for permanent disability, unfortunately, our legislature had the bright idea to fix the payment. So permanent disability payments don't get adjusted every year, and it doesn't matter what inflation data is. So, we have the same permanent disability rates that we've had since 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Those rates were changed in 2012 by the legislature. There was a period during 2013 where the permanent disability was dependent on the percentage of the rating you had. And then 2014 and on, the permanent disability has been the same, which the maximum rate for permanent disability right now is $290 a week. And it's been that way for now over a decade, which obviously is a problem for a lot of people when you're talking about compensation for injuries that have displaced you from your employment.
Right.
Temporary disability, on the other hand, changes every year. The legislature at least got that right. And they said, look, the rate at which people are paid their lost wages while they're recovering gets adjusted based on inflation data every year. So the temporary disability maximums that we had in 2013 are much different than what we have now. So, the max temporary disability rate right now is it's around 1,700. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head here to quote you. But that is the maximum amount. So, if 2/3 your average weekly check is like 2,500 a week, then the most you get is actually the maximum TD rate. And it doesn't matter if you earn significantly more or not.
That's good to know. Good information that you're sharing out here. Let's talk about taxes. What does this look like when someone's getting payments from the workers' comp system? Do you have to report this to the tax? That's like one of the biggest questions we get a lot.
Yeah, I think it's pretty common for people to think that it's treated as income, because it's a form of wage replacement. But in California, workers' comp payments are not taxable because they're considered personal injury awards. It would be wrong of the government to deprive you of money that's supposed to be going towards your health and welfare. Even though in a lot of times people can use the money for whatever they want, it's still really all about your health, right? When you get a workers' comp settlement, the idea is that you're being paid for your injuries, for your suffering, for your future medical needs. So why should those things be taxed? Similarly, bankruptcy may try and go after workers' comp benefits, but in a lot of cases, it's exempt from bankruptcy as well. The legislature, I think, really wanted to protect workers' compensation benefits because at their core, they're really to help you get back up on your feet and work through whatever medical ailments you have. So, you don't have to worry about state tax. You don't have to worry about federal tax. You don't worry about Medicare, state disability, or any other deductions. There are potential situations where your benefits can be garnished by child support, which we see pretty commonly. Child support can file liens on your workers' comp case to try and recover errors that you may have. Something we have to negotiate and deal with pretty frequently. But child support, separate from taxes, taxes are really a non-issue for workers' comp.
That's great information. I'm glad we're separating the two. So there you have it. If you have any child support cases open, you might want to call the significant other in that time and be like, hey, I'm getting this money, but I really need to get my health back together. I promise I'll catch up after.
Yeah. And if you're a client of a firm and you're listening to this podcast, awesome. Please make sure your attorney knows that you may have a child support lien as well.
Because they won't tell you, right? And then surprise.
Yeah, sometimes. And look, I'm all for people taking care of their kids and stuff. At the same time, we're not trying to avoid that. At the same time, we do want to make sure that, ultimately when people get their settlement, that they are getting money that they need for their medical care.
Right.
And so often child support can be very aggressive in how they try to recoup money that may be owed to children. Whether that's right or wrong, we just want to strike a balance and make sure that our client has the ability to get medical care and be housed and continue working after their case is over. So
I would really hope so that they would too. It's funny. It's funny. This double standard that you're explaining right now is they want to take care of that aspect of, we're not going to charge you taxes because we feel it's wrong for us to take money for your health benefits and stuff. But yet insurance companies take money regardless and try to lowball you. So you know what I mean? Like it's this little, like, you're explaining how this part comes into hand, but yet they thought about that, but didn't think about, like, hey, let's be fair in the sense of insurance companies. I don't know if I'm explaining myself. It's like,
you are. And at the heart of the workers' comp system it's a benefits delivery system. It was never intended to be, I think, as litigious as it is now. Really, back in the day, we exchanged the right to sue in our employers because we were supposed to be able to get benefits for employees. It was just supposed to be like, maybe this is a stretch, but like using PTO or sick time, right? It's supposed to be a benefit that's there for you that you just, when you need it, you get it. No questions asked. Unfortunately, I think when you're mixing profit and motivation on one side, versus taking care of someone on the other side, insurance companies are really incentivized to, pay out as little as possible.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a lot of stuff we've discovered about payments in this one tiny episode. I promised we were going to keep it short and straight to the point. A lot of the questions that people want to know when it comes to payments. I think what best way then to end this podcast with talking about the different types of money that would come in from STIPs versus, the compromise and release settlements. Those are two huge differences. I think, can we explain them and then how that money comes into play or how that payment works?
Sure. So when we're talking about compromise and release, it's really a lump sum settlement, meaning the insurance company is going to offer you a one-time payment that generally resolves all issues in your case. So, if your medical with your disability is worth $100,000, they'll say, hey, here's $100,000, go away. In which case, once the case is settled, meaning a judge approves the settlement, they have 30 days to pay you and they issue you a check. And that's that. Stipulated awards typically are structured payments, meaning that you have a permanent disability percentage. That disability percentage is paid out over whatever number of weeks it is at $290 a week until it's all paid out. Plus, you keep an open right to medical care. Stipulated awards aren't typically people's favorite because they generally don't like to deal with the insurance company for future medical care. And two, they would rather have their money up front rather than paid over a number of weeks or, depending on how high the rating is, potentially years or even their entire lifetime. So there's some advantages of actually getting a compromise and release settlement. Of course, in workers' comp, the compromise and release settlements can't be forced. It's entirely a voluntary process, which means, oftentimes when you're settling by compromise and release, you're not necessarily accepting the full value of your case because you can't force the insurance company to pay everything in lump sum. But at the same time, you want them to. And so they may attach a different value to the case than you do. And you may have to say, as a value proposition, would I rather have this money now, or would I rather take less, have it paid out over time, and have future medical care open? So there's different balancing factors that you have to consider when you're thinking about what type of settlement you want, how the payment structure works.
Right. Are there any other type of payments that we haven't mentioned? I know these are the huge ones that come into play for a claim. Other ways people get paid or any other type of payments that they would see come in?
Yeah, you see people reimbursed for their mileage expenses, which is something that's common. If you have an accepted workers' comp case, you can submit your transportation costs for reimbursement to the insurance company. And they reimburse you based on, IRS mileage rates for the year that changes every single year. In addition to that, you can be reimbursed via a voucher for supplemental job displacement, which means, job retraining or job or education. So when you're done with your case, you can rehabilitate in the workforce. So those are a couple other payments that typically come up in workers' compensation as well.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Well, Bilal, thank you so much for sharing this information. Once again, we're excited to have you on board again. And for those of you just joining for the first time, please make sure you hit that subscribe button so you get notified every time we upload new content, and that little bell so you get the notification. If you are listening to us on your favorite app for the podcast, make sure you follow us on YouTube. You could actually put faces to this conversation as well. And share this information, most importantly, with anyone you think could benefit from if someone's injured at work or they're fighting a case and they're doing it alone. There's just so much information we provide on a weekly basis. And we'll catch you guys on the next episode of Work on Talk. Thanks.